Before we begin, a brief content warning. This episode contains references to violence against children and sexual abuse. Some of the details may be distressing for certain listeners. Please take care of yourself. In the previous episode, we went through the trials. The pressure was intense. Anderson maintained his confession, pointing to Kristiansand as the cynical main perpetrator, while Kristiansand denied all guilt, claiming he was at home when the crimes occurred. In court, Kristiansand was portrayed as violent and sexually fixated. DNA evidence and the way the police framed the case reinforced the impression of his guilt. Telecommunication data suggesting the opposite was overlooked. When the verdicts were handed down, Anderson received 17 years, and Kristiansand was sentenced to 21 years of preventative detention, but both appealed. In the Court of Appeal, Kristiansand was again sentenced to 21 years of preventative detention, while Anderson received an additional 2 years. Kristiansand still maintains that he is innocent, but will anyone listen to him? Both young men are imprisoned and serve their sentences separately. From Anderson's side, things are relatively quiet, but from Kristiansand's side, more is to unfold. Kristiansand insists on his innocence. He attempts to get his lawyer to file a request for reopening the case. Meanwhile, his parents visit him in prison every third Saturday for 2.5 hours. They take all the visiting hours they're allowed. They travel early. The journey itself takes several hours, but they do everything they can to maximize the time spent with their son. It's emotionally exhausting. Everyone in town knows who they are. Their surname is known across the country. Yet, they remain steadfast in their belief that their son is innocent. They're exhausted, but it's important for them to show up to support Kristiansand. After all, he is their son. Kristiansand is angry and frustrated. He remains oppositional for a long time, over several years. He's assigned a psychologist to speak with while in prison. The psychologist describes Kristiansand as highly skeptical. It takes a long time for them to build a working relationship. Kristiansand is afraid of what the psychologist intends for him. The psychologist notices that Kristiansand carries a lot of anger and struggles to regulate his emotions. Kristiansand confirms that he has felt this way his entire life. This also affects him in prison, his relationship with other inmates, and it's important for him to work on it. The psychologist tells Kristiansand from the get-go that the treatment will be based on what he's been convicted for, even though he claims to be innocent. Despite this, they manage to find a way to work together. They have sessions over several years. It's not until 3 years after the treatment began that the psychologist himself starts to doubt Kristiansand's guilt and decides to read the verdict. He had deliberately avoided reading it initially, so he could get to know Kristiansand without approaching him with a perspective overly shaped by the crimes for which he had been convicted. He had heard about the case in the media and knew the general outline. He believed the details would only be detrimental to the treatment. When the psychologist reads the verdict, his doubts grow even stronger. He notices the weak evidence and that Kristiansand is primarily convicted based on Anderson's testimony, a testimony riddled with gaps. He considers the case's evidence flimsy. At this point, he decides to cautiously discuss this with Kristiansand. Kristiansand reveals that his lawyer, the same lawyer who represented him during the trials, is working on a request for reopening the case. The psychologist is surprised that this request has not yet been submitted, as several years have passed since Kristiansand was convicted. He asks if Kristiansand still wants the case reopened. Kristiansand confirms that he does, adding that, as far as he knows, his lawyer is still working on it. Not long after, Kristiansand's father happens to meet his lawyer at the shop. He asks how the case is progressing and about the reopening request. The lawyer replies that he had long tried to get specialists to review data and other evidence in the case, but without success, and some time ago concluded that the case would not advance. He had put the matter aside. This is news to both Kristiansand and his father. When Kristiansand tells his psychologist about this, the psychologist encourages him to change lawyers. He needs someone willing to actively fight for his case. Kristiansand sends requests to several lawyers, initially without success. The psychologist recalls a lawyer who had previously taken on several difficult and stigmatized cases others would not touch. He recommends Kristiansand to contact him. Kristiansand's request is accepted. The new lawyer says he will take the case as long as he can work on it in his own way. He adds that if he takes the case and Kristiansand is guilty, this will eventually come out. Kristiansand is simply pleased that someone is willing to take on his case and help him try to have it reopened. The new lawyer acts quickly. He requests access to all documents related to the case. He also asks Kristiansand to undergo a lie detector test, which Kristiansand agrees to. While lie detector tests are not considered reliable in the Norwegian legal system, the lawyer likely sees it as a way to better assess Kristiansand's innocence and as a measure to reassure himself before committing fully to the case. This new lawyer is the first to bring the case documents out from the police stations and the courts. He quickly brings in expert consultants from the United States and the UK to review the case. He also attempts to recruit retired forensic technicians to examine the technical evidence, but no one is willing to become involved with this case in particular. Society widely perceives Kristiansand as a child murderer and rapist. No one wants to be part of a process aiming to exonerate him The lawyer meticulously reviews the case and, together with several specialists, begins to form an alternative theory of what might have happened that night. Up to this point, we've heard the sequence of events as described by Anderson, seen the technical findings, evidence and witness statements as presented in court. We've been presented with police theories and the media narrative they created. But what do the lawyer and the specialists he brings in actually conclude? Let's begin by examining what we already know. The fathers of the girls, alongside with the brother of one of the girls, were out searching the morning after the disappearance. They found the soda bottle the girls had brought with them and handed it to the police. It got registered as trash. The bottle was found not far from the crime scene. Had the police taken the discovery more seriously, the girls might have been found a day earlier. This could have been crucial for securing evidence, particularly since the crime scene was outdoors and easily affected by weather. In addition, evidence collection was inadequate, and any fingerprints or DNA traces on the bottle may have been lost. The bottle was left with trash in the tent where it was delivered for over a week before the police became interested. When it was finally sent for analysis, nothing could be found, as it had been heavily contaminated by fingerprints and other traces from the police. When the girls were found on May 21st, 2000, and the police were waiting for investigators, they feared rain and covered the girls with the used tarpaulin from one of the officers' garages. The idea was that it was better to cover them than risk losing all evidence if it started to rain. It was Sunday and the stores were closed. Looking back at the weather forecast for that day, it seems it did not actually rain. Perhaps rain had been predicted, or maybe they just saw some heavy, dark clouds. Regardless, the tarpaulin and the search personnel and police at the scene were not considered carefully enough when later analysing DNA. They cross-checked the pubic hair against DNA from police and search personnel, but past that, the risk of contamination seems to have been forgotten. Indeed, it was unlikely that the boys' DNA would have been at the scene if they were not guilty. They had not been involved in the search, had no connection to the officer who had used the tarpaulin, nor the girls themselves. That could have explained a DNA finding. Yet, these partial DNA traces, those that could not have come from Anderson and thus implicated Kristiansand, could just as easily have been the result of contamination at the crime scene. The small DNA sample first attributed to Kristiansand was so weak and partial that it could have matched 54% of all men in Norway. This means that even if it could be ruled out as Anderson's DNA, it could have come from half of all men present at the scene, conducting technical tests or coming into contact with the used tarpaulin. Another mistake was that the police did not collect the trash from the various bins in the recreational area quickly enough. 6 days after the murders, 4 days after the bodies were found, a park service collected all the trash. The police were informed of this but still took around a week before deciding to examine what had been retrieved. The trash was unlabeled, so they couldn't be certain which bin each item came from. They found the bag the girls had brought with them. Based on the number of banana peels in the same bag, it can be assumed that the bag was thrown into one of the bins near a gravel field up north, as several people had eaten bananas there during a run, but this cannot be known for sure. It is believed that the perpetrator discarded the bag there. Anderson said it was Kristiansand who pressed the clothing into the dam, retrieved the bag and took it with him. But the place the bag was most likely discarded was along the route Anderson described for himself, not the one he described for Kristiansand. The police being so late in checking the trash in the area meant that they lost the opportunity to match the discovery site of the bag to Anderson's testimony with certainty, and it made it less likely they would find any traces on the bag itself. According to Anderson's account of how the bag was handled, it should have been possible to find fingerprints on it. Again, something potentially crucial for the investigation was missed, simply due to poor police work. Furthermore, when the police began searching for potential perpetrators, it seems they focused heavily on Kristiansand. Anderson was mainly called in to check Kristiansand's alibi. When the pubic hair matched Anderson, the police still chose to arrest Kristiansand. At that point, the theory shifted to the idea that there must have been two perpetrators to control both girls. But where with this theory when only Kristiansand was suspected and not Anderson? In many ways, it appears that the police had already fixed their suspicion on Kristiansand so strongly that they subconsciously began shaping the evidence to fit him into the case. The two perpetrator theory only emerged when it became necessary to arrest Kristiansand. Interestingly, the profile created on the case initially indicated only one perpetrator. There was no basis to conclude there were two at that stage, but the police reached that conclusion anyway, probably because it fit their pre-existing suspicion of Kristiansand. Another aspect of the police's approach was that it seemed focused solely on getting someone, obtaining a confession, and securing a conviction, not conducting a thorough investigation without leading interrogations or shortcuts. This was not unique to this case. It was generally how police operated at that time. Several well-known cases in Norway unfolded poorly for this reason, some resulting in miscarriages of justice or false confessions. Specifically in this case, the officer who first interrogated Anderson after linking him to the pubic hair immediately asked whether he could have been a victim himself. The question was likely influenced by the long-standing focus on Kristiansand as the potential perpetrator, but it gave Anderson an opportunity to downplay his own involvement. If you consider someone capable of committing sexual abuse and murder against two innocent children, deprive them of the lives they had ahead of them, that then is presented with the chance to escape more lightly while sacrificing their best friend, why wouldn't they take it? To appear credible, he couldn't solely place himself as an unwilling witness, so he admitted to being pressured into murdering one of the girls, but left the rest on Kristiansand. The chance to present Kristiansand as the main perpetrator was something he seized. Whether you believe Kristiansand is guilty or not, it's clear that Andersen repeatedly offloads responsibility. He initially claimed that he had not raped either girl, but he changed his story twice as new evidence was presented. First admitting to abusing the eldest girl, then only the youngest. This leads us to a recurring issue. Andersen repeatedly changed his explanations when presented with new evidence. He gave new versions of the evening over and over. This also happened before he confessed, but let's summarize what he says afterwards. At first, he's sure that Kristiansand parked his bike by the gate and took his phone with him. When presented with the telecommunication evidence, he says Kristiansand may have left the phone in a bag on his bike. When it's revealed that Kristiansand supposedly sent messages at the same time he was at the crime scene, Andersen explains that Kristiansand could have been away briefly, for several minutes, at least 15, to walk back to his bike, send a message and return to the scene. Kristiansand's bike was seen by witnesses when he himself described being in the area when he went to find Andersen and retrieve the key to the shed earlier that day. But none of the witnesses from that evening remember seeing a bike by the gate. 44 people had passed the gate at the time in question. 31 others walked past, but close enough that they could have seen the bike if it had been there. 5 people stretched against the gate. No one saw a bike there. One person also said he believes he would have noticed the bike if it had been elsewhere in the area, as it was distinctive, but he had not seen anything. Shouldn't some of these witnesses, especially those stretching against the gate, have noticed a red and yellow bike that was locked in place? Andersen also initially claimed that he walked with Kristiansand and the girls to the crime scene, but when confronted with the fact that the DNA evidence linked to him was a pubic hair, he suddenly said he had stopped along the way to urinate where the girls would later be hidden, then caught up afterwards. The same occurred with his account of his own participation. At first, he claimed he had only killed one girl, the youngest, and that Kristiansand had committed the sexual assaults. When confronted with DNA evidence linking him to the assaults, he admitted to abusing the eldest girl. When evidence was presented linking him to the youngest, he eventually changed his story again to claim it must have been her. It does not appear to have been presented in court how inconsistent Andersen's statements were, or that he only changed his explanations after being confronted with evidence that contradicted what he had previously said. We also know that the girls left home around 6:30 p.m. They were seen by a woman on their way to the swimming spot about 5 minutes later. They arrive at the swimming hole at 6:38 p.m. and the students who were also going to swim arrived about 2 minutes later. The students left at 6:48 p.m, by which time the girls were still there. 2 minutes later, a man passed the swimming hole and reported the jetty empty. In total, 13 witnesses reported that they did not see anyone at the jetty between 6:50 p.m. and 7:20 p.m. A witness walking his dog said that the dog reacted to something in the forest around 7:10 p.m. and repeatedly tried to pull him back there. They were not far from the crime scene when the dog reacted, trying to pull them up into the forest. When they arrived at the swimming hole by the third stamp, the dog reacted again and attempted to pull them back in the direction they had come from. Another witness reported hearing 3 to 4 short screams in the area slightly after 8 p.m. He said it must have been then, because he had just heard the church bell ringing from the town centre, and they ring at 8 p.m. 2 other witnesses from opposite sides of the crime scene reported hearing rustling and banging from the forest where the girls were killed between 8:20 p.m. and 8:35 p.m. One thought the sounds came from a large animal, the other from someone pitching a tent, but both heard noises loud enough to react to. There was also a man who claimed to have seen 2 smaller people with the taller one on a path nearby between 7:45 p.m. and 8 p.m. while walking. He was some distance away and could therefore only make out the silhouettes. It's speculated that what he saw could have been the girls and Anderson. Further mapping suggests his observation might have occurred even later, possibly as late as 8:35 p.m, based on other statements of what he saw and where. The 3 people he described do not match any of the others reported in the area at the time, but it cannot be confirmed that he actually saw the girls, as the description was vague and he had only seen these people from a distance. There were no other witnesses in the area who reported seeing them either. The father of the girls had already searched the same area shortly before 8 p.m, and no one had been seen at the jetty after 6:50. So if it were the girls he saw, where were they in the meantime? None of these witnesses were called to testify in court. What makes these witness accounts particularly interesting is that they may indicate the crimes occurred later in the evening than initially assumed. If the girls screamed slightly after 8 p.m, and the rustling and banging actually came from the crime scene, then Kristiansand had an alibi, as he was on the phone from 8:20 p.m. through a cell tower that did not cover the crime scene. If it was the girls that were seen between 7:45 and 8:35 p.m, they were only seen with 1 man, not 2, which also points to Kristiansand not being there. Aside from this, there is the DNA and telecommunication evidence. There is a pubic hair found at the crime scene belonging to Anderson. The telecommunication data actually indicate that it would have been nearly impossible for Kristiansand to have been at the scene, but the reliability of this evidence was criticized, and it ended up being discarded. Regarding the other DNA evidence presented in court, there were matches from sperm cells found on both girls. The sample from the youngest girls can be linked to Anderson, but not the sample from the eldest. That one could have come from Kristiansand. This is used to conclude that there were 2 perpetrators. One is Anderson, and therefore the other must be Kristiansand. In the next episode, we will see what the new lawyer, together with the newly consulted experts, concludes in the case, and how this affects the ongoing process of the retrial application